Okay, everybody, welcome back to Discovery Track. Near the end of the day, we have one of our favorite companies, Bitmovin. They flew over, and they are going to be talking about video encoding and HTML5 playback with native DRM. The only session in the Discovery Track for all 2 days to touch on encoding, which surprised me. It's such an important topic. Stefan Lederer will guide us through it, and wait till the end because it looks like everybody's getting a prize, a nice prize. So take it away, Stefan.
Thank you. So welcome to my session on native DRM in HTML5 and what does this mean for the player and for the encoding process. So when we today talk about DRM deployments, most people think, oh, that's not going to work. So that's a huge problem at the moment. You see it with HTML5. Everybody is switching from Flash, from Silverlight to HTML5. And you end up in problems with, I don't know, open source tools, unready workflows, or simply it's just too complex with the different browsers, platforms, and ecosystems. So that results in bad user experience for the user. It's not working, or if it's working, it's buffering. The quality is low, or the startup delay, especially for DRM, and the license authentication is long, but also for the content provider it's not great because infrastructure is costly, it's not scalable, and that's something we have to work on. So to give you a little bit of background why I'm doing that presentation, we are at Bitmovin a video infrastructure provider. We provide cloud encoding, we provide HTML5 players, and we have a sweet spot on DRM protected workflows for live as well as for on demand. And here we try to make it as easy as possible. So in the past, DRM was a pain. DRM systems were complex and hard to set up, and we try our best to really simplify the topic, to integrate with DRM partners, to showcase the workflow and reference models, and make it easy to deploy a Netflix-like system with the whole DRM workflow, for example. So what does this mean? How does online DRM work as a workflow perspective, from a workflow perspective? So first and foremost, you have your input files or your input live signal. You are encoding that content, obviously to streaming formats that work on the web, like MPEG- or HLS. In this encoding step, you have the packaging step, which actually is the packaging of the encoding to the content, to the format, to the streaming format. And in this packaging step, you apply the DRM for the stream. For this application of the DRM to the stream, you need DRM protection services, DRM keys to protect the stream. And that's provided by multi-DRM providers, by DRM servers. So you take this key, you apply it to the content, and then you have your assets protected. You cannot watch them anymore, they're encrypted. So now you deploy your content to your CDN and deliver it to your users. Your users want to watch this content, and what they do, they stream it to the web browser, and in the web browser they have a player which actually does the streaming. And this player is also communicating with the DRM servers again. So here the loop closes, and here the authentication happens. So the player asks the licensing server, is this user with that configuration allowed to playback that stream on the given platform. There are also DRM protection schemes that restrict playback of high quality content, for example, on notebooks that doesn't allow the necessary protection schemes. So this player communicates with the license server and gets the approval or not the approval. And that's a secure workflow, basically from the beginning to the end. So what does this mean now from the player side? So you need an adaptive streaming player, an HTML5 player, which is capable to download the content and to do the communication with the license server. We have one, but there are also plenty of open source projects and other products on the market which do that. However, the integration with DRM services is a little bit a tricky part of it. So why is it necessary to talk about the player? The player was not a big issue the last years, but a player starts to get a critical part of the infrastructure. So it's not that easy to have a player for HTML5. You have to reach all browser platforms and all browser versions, and on desktop, mobile, and now on also smart TVs. That's a challenge. You cannot use plugins anymore like Flash and Silverlight. You have to rely on the underlying interfaces of the browser, like the HTML5 media source extensions and encrypted media extensions, which I will cover a little bit more in detail. And you have to really go into detail for live streaming, for on-demand streaming, catch-up, for example, and so on. And all those topics are highly bound to, for example, DRM authentication topics, like dynamic keys or updating the keys, for example, and so on. So it's far away from being easy, and unfortunately this topic gets more and more complex for content providers nowadays. Why we are in that phase, why we are now talking about HTML5 players, because Silverlight and Flash are not supported by the browser ecosystems anymore, or are going to be. It's Flash is going to be blocked in Chrome, in Firefox, in Safari, and that breaks a lot of online video workflows at the moment. Same applies with Silverlight since a while, and Microsoft already outdated Silverlight. So we have to move to HTML5. There's no way around it, and that means we have also to move to the new DRM systems there. As mentioned, we have to use the media source extensions, which are the interface to the browsers and to the decoder of the browser for adaptive media content. And for DRM protected workflows, we have to use the HTML5 encrypted media extensions, which work with MPEG-Dash and common encryption as streaming and protection format. So what's the objective of this ecosystem around the MSE and the EME? The objective is to have an open ecosystem defined by W3C and are not bound by proprietary plugins like Flash from Adobe or Silverlight from Microsoft. So that's the objective why the HTML5 MSE and EME are existing, and what is how is the workflow here. So basically you have to provide a player that downloads the content and moves the media segments, the content files, to the browser's decoding buffer. And this buffer-based model is basically what the MSE is. It's not a fully featured player, it's just a decoding interface. And that's the reason why we need a player around that. So specification is already out since 2015, and that means we are on a stable version. The MSE is out in the market and is used by Netflix, by YouTube, by HBO, and so on and so forth. More than 50% of the US internet traffic are delivered via the HTML5 MSE, so that's here to stay, and that's something we have to use. Exactly. So what does this mean now from a browser coverage perspective? So we want to reach all browsers. However, we have different streaming formats with different browsers which support different streaming formats again. So what does this mean? So MPEG-Dash is the typical format you go to when you talk about DRM protected content. That's supported by all major browsers out there. At the same time, we talk about HLS. We talk about HLS protected content with AES encryption, for example. That's something which is not natively supported by the HTML5 MSE, because the HTML5 MSE only supports MPEG-Dash. In particular, ISO-based media as container format and not MPEG-2 transport stream as used by HLS. So for that, player vendors have to provide a workaround, and that workaround is that the Dash content is trans-multiplexed on the client side to the HLS content is trans-multiplexed to MPEG-Dash content on the client side. And that's what you can see here in the yellow areas for the HTML5 HLS support. So that goes also forward to mobile devices, where it gets a little bit more tricky, as the iOS world is not supporting MPEG-Dash. Especially Safari on iOS is tricky, because Safari natively requires HLS. So you cannot really have one unique workflow for DRM in that particular case, because you need to use HLS with DRM protection like Fairplay on those devices. And when you also want to reach browsers, you need to use MPEG-Dash with the common encryption protection on top of it. So you end up in a hybrid scenario with two forms of the content. Which DRM systems are we now seeing out in the market? Also here it's getting a little bit diversified. So on desktop with MPEG-Dash streams in HTML5, you go for Chrome and for Firefox, typically with Widevine Modular. Firefox also has the support for Primetime from Adobe. However, we don't see that really in the market. Internet Explorer and Edge are going for PlayReady, and Opera goes also for Widevine Modular. So all those different DRM systems can be combined in one form of the content, in one stream. Common encryptions enables it that the stream has multiple DRM systems which are supported, and that's a great achievement by common encryption in general. However, when we go for HLS, the DRM systems are really limited. You only have Fairplay as real DRM system. Of course, you can always do an AES encryption, which is no real DRM, but close to. And that's also something where you can reach all browsers. However, Fairplay as DRM system is only supported on Safari desktop. Safari mobile is not supporting any DRM systems, because Apple has the policy that DRM protected content has to be played in the native app. Yeah, that's on the player side, on the mobile side. Fairplay is not supported on mobile Safari, however, AES encryption is supported. Widevine works perfectly fine on Android and PlayReady as well. From a streaming devices perspective, again here the Apple world is dominated by HLS with Fairplay, and the Google world is dominated by Widevine Modular, but it's also possible to stream PlayReady protected content to the Chromecast. So we talked about the player. We also need DRM partners and DRM license providers. You can either host your DRM licensing servers for the different DRM systems by your own, which ends up in a deployment for a Widevine Modular server, a PlayReady server, and an HLS server. At the same time, a new approach is coming to the market, which is called multi-DRM providers. And multi-DRM providers are the classical players on the market we all know, like Irdeto, for example, DRM, Konax, and so on and so forth, which provide API interfaces for content providers to retrieve the DRM keys, and also provide interfaces for player vendors to talk with the DRM system to approve the playback. So at the beginning, we also said we were talking about encoding. What does it mean for encoding, and what do you need in encoding to deploy a DRM protected workflow? So DRM and encoding is rather straightforward, I have to admit. So if you generate MPEG-Dash content, the only thing you have to do to make it DRM protected is an AES encryption on this content and provide the necessary DRM information in the manifest and in the container format. That's nothing you do by your own. That's supported by origin servers, that's supported by encoding servers or encoding services like ours, for example. And that's not the big complexity. So basically what happens is, you get, like you saw here at the beginning, you get the license keys together with the DRM meta information from the license provider, and you apply this in the encoding of and in the packaging of the content in your origin server, in your encoder, for example. So that's basically where we are currently. So another topic that pops up more and more is common encryption. So we are currently in the phase where we started with MPEG-Dash and HLS as adaptive streaming formats for desktop, mobile, smart TVs and so on. And that worked really, really good. So when we talk about the time before MPEG-Dash and HLS, we are talking about additional proprietary formats like smooth streaming, like Adobe HDS, which are not anymore relevant to the market. And now we end up in two formats that are relevant for the market. So recently, HLS got the support for ISO-based media for fragmented MP4 segments, which are also used by MPEG-Dash. That's the first step to further combination of both formats. That means you can use the same media assets, the same formats for the different streaming systems. So you use the same fragmented MP4 segments you use in Dash for your HLS stream. That's great. That's simplifying the encoding and the packaging workflow, and that's reducing your storage efforts by 50%. And also the caching and the CDN and the playback infrastructure gets a lot easier. But there is one problem right now, and the problem is that HLS uses a different AES mode for encryption of the ISO-based media files than MPEG-Dash. They are mutually exclusive at the moment, so you can either go with HLS DRM protected HLS content with ISO-based media, fragmented MP4 and DRM, or you go for the other protection scheme used by common encryption and by the typical formats systems there, like like PlayReady, like Whitewine or Primetime, for example. So that really doesn't solve the problem. That's a huge issue if you want to deploy CMAF, which is the Common Media Application Format, which is more or less the name of this approach, combining HLS and MPEG-Dash. When you want to deploy CMAF, what's happening right now, and it's nothing which is relevant to the market in 2016 and might be also not super relevant to 2017. However, we see that the DRM systems are getting more flexible. That means the common encryption DRM systems used for MPEG-Dash, which are Whitewine Modular and PlayReady and Primetime, adopt both AES modes, so that they are compatible also to the Apple FairPlay AES modes, and that will help us to have one single DRM workflow. That's currently happening. Whitewine just announced 2 weeks ago that they will support both AES encryption modes. We are still waiting on Microsoft and Adobe. However, the only one which is relevant here is maybe Microsoft to adopt also both AES modes and to really simplify this deployment workflow as well. That's it. So thank you very much for your attention. If you have any questions to the topic, please don't hesitate to...
Round of applause for Stefan for making a complicated topic very understandable. Ever-changing world of encoding and format support. Great job, and I'm sure we have a few questions. Everyone get that? Someone must have something. Sometimes they're shy. Anyone? Anyone? No dumb questions. Come on.
There's a question in the back.
We have one in the back. Terrific.
I was just going to ask if you had any prediction on CBC versus CTR, how that might get resolved in the future.
Yeah, so that are exactly the DRM, the AES modes.
Could you just explain what those are for people?
Yes, so CBC and CTR are the protection schemes of AES, and they are not compatible to each other. So what we see now is that Whitewine and especially Whitewine is now supporting both modes. That will help a lot to be flexible on that side, to adopt to one or to both modes basically, and to have the same modes as FairPlay is losing in that case. So the only thing which we have to wait now is what Microsoft with PlayReady is doing. If they also open up the spec for both possibilities, and then we have a solution.
Yeah. Are there any optimizations to reduce the latency of HLS for live streaming and also for dynamic segment sizes?
Yes, I have. For dynamic segment sizes in HLS are now possible with the latest version of the spec, if I'm correct. I'm more into MPEG-Dash. In MPEG-Dash you have low latency support with HTTP push, for example, and a couple of other things. And when we go into CMAF in particular, you have the support of chunked content, you have subsegments and all new features that allow also low latency use cases a lot better than MPEG-Dash or HLS are supporting that today. I think a quick fix for latency reduction is definitely a reduction of the segment size, and with that you can achieve quite okay results. Of course, nothing that's close to RTMP and Flash, but hopefully we will achieve that with CMAF and from a protocol perspective with HTTP 2.0.
And that's time. Thank you, Stefan. And everyone, you should have a copy of the white paper of Bitmoven's presentation and findings. And then if you want to make an orderly stampede, Bitmoven has very kindly brought some lovely journals, t-shirts, sunglasses, and lots of pens. All right, so thank you. And 5 minutes, we'll be back with our last of the day. Okay, thanks everyone for joining us for our very last Discovery Track session of the day. Got some cutting edge content here with Teradek. Everybody loves Teradek. We're going to be talking about real-time 360-degree monitoring and live streaming. Present a nice virtual reality experience for your viewers. And we have John Landeman, VP of Sales, going to talk to us. Take it away, John.
I do. Well, yeah.
Take it away soon.
Technical glitch. Hang on a second.
All right.
Not really technical, but I want to make sure we hear you. I want to give you the full effect here.
Should we put our goggles on to enjoy this 3D presentation? I feel like I can see it all around me. It's 3D right now.
Well, firstly, thank you guys for sticking it out here to the last presentation of the day. I always ask those doing these shows, I beg them to serve alcohol at this event because, you know, if you've survived it this long, I think it is definitely time that, you know, you got a good beer inside you. Anyhow, we're here today to talk about VR. I think everyone and their uncle is talking about VR. I will say that there are two basic differences of VR at the moment. One is the stereoscopic that the Ozo is producing, and the other is non-stereoscopic or VR 360 that we are producing. How did Teradek, who is an encoder manufacturer, get to the place of being in the VR world? I'll give you a little bit of history. Teradek produces a product called the Teradek Cube, which you may or may not be familiar with, but it's a very small encoder that 5 years ago was developed to be able to take a feed from a camera and use an iPad as a monitor. We've been doing that for about 5 years, as I said, and back in the beginning, I started to sell a lot of cubes to engineers because it allowed them to buy an iPad for no other reason. And the delay at that time, you know, we had an iPad 1, the delay at that time was about, you know, 10 frames if you were lucky, but just the fact that someone could own an iPad 1 and get their company to pay for it was, you know, cool. So as the years went by, we increased the performance of the iPads, we increased the performance of the cubes, and then about 2 years ago, at the NAB 2 years ago, we were able to take a couple of cubes on a couple of cameras, Wi-Fi them to a router, and then we created an app on the iPad called TerraView that we were able to quad view an iPad and turn it into a multi-view monitor. So at the beginning of this year, we had a company come to us that was producing high-end VR movies. a company called Verse, if anyone's familiar with them. They do very, very nice, high-end post-produced VR content that you can download, put in your goggles or put on your cardboard and view these streams. But there is a problem that they brought to us that we realized existed for every single manufacturer or every single producer of VR content. Has anyone tried to create a VR production here? Anyone? No one? How did you monitor it? When you're shooting live, right? When you're shooting a 2D or when you're shooting something, you can stand behind the camera and you can watch what's going on. You can put it on a monitor. How'd you do that with VR?
Just let it rip.
You just let it rip. Great.
Shoot a lot.
You shoot a lot, okay. So customer came to us with exactly that problem. They wanted to monitor the VR that they were shooting. Teradek makes a device that you put on a camera and streams to an iPad. We can in fact take 4 cubes and stream them to a quad view on an iPad. So the first time we were ever introduced into the VR world, back in, years ago, back in January 2016, we put 4 cubes on top of a VR rig, wired all of them up, put them into a router, and stood back with an iPad, and we watched quad view. That was about it. We could see quad view on an iPad, and that was great because at least you could tell if one of the cameras had gone off, which, if anyone's used GoPros, knows that after about 6 minutes they overheat and just shut down. So we took that back to the office, and as we do in Teradek, we look at a problem and we see how we can solve it. And we are very good at making little black boxes. And we have a lot of very clever engineers back at the office that one of them said, I see that quad view, I think I can stitch them. So this was now February. NAB is coming up in April, and we think we might have something. So by NAB, we created this little box, which, again, if you know Teradek and you know the naming conventions of our products, they make no sense. Meaning the cube is not a cube, which is the name of our encoder. This one is called sphere, and if anyone thinks that that's a sphere, I don't know what the hell they're doing here. Anyhow, so what this is basically is a box that takes in 4 HDMI feeds. So that means we're actually agnostic to the camera rigs that we use, right? You can use 2 cameras, 4 cameras. We can group 2 of these together and loop them together to support 8 cameras. And we synchronize all of those feeds internally, encode them. Each feed coming in from at least the rig that we were using here, which is the GoPro rig, was coming in HDMI. We're encoding that into, or we're taking in a 1080i 30 feed. We're encoding each of those feeds at 8 megabits per second. And we are kind of synchronizing them and pushing them out over Ethernet. And the way that we monitor we have a Wi-Fi router that is tied onto the tripod. And we basically Wi-Fi it to an iPad and live stitch it. And we started supplying those to these producers of VR. And they really loved it because at last there was a way to monitor VR. And if you go onto my stand on the other side of this wall, you'll actually see the rig, and you'll see us doing exactly that in real time. As you may or may not know, Teradek is also very popular in the streaming world. We make that little cube, and we make the video, and we make the bond, and we make the sphere, well, we make the, I'll run through the product line. We make the T-Rex, the Slice, the Cube, the Video Pro. All of these boxes are basically little boxes that stream. So if you can imagine, we have a lot of experience in streaming. So we have the side of the company that makes our monitoring systems to monitor on iPad, and we've got the other side of our business that is involved in streaming. So we put them in a room, and the guy that does is head of our streaming says, I think I can take the output of that iPad and stream it. So by NAB, we had come up with a solution to not only monitor in real time what you're shooting, but also to live stream it. And at NAB, we did our first ever live stream of a 360 event using the rig that we have next door. So how is that related to the fact that we then got involved with that an ABC show, Dancing with the Stars? Well, they saw us at NAB, and they use our encoders to stream their show on a Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday night, and they asked to test the sphere, which is really what I'm going to talk to you about here tonight, and the problems that I came across and some of the solutions, and the way that you have to really, if you're going to stream VR, how you have to really think about it, and how it is completely different when doing a VR event from doing a 2D event. I'm going to show you the video here that is the VR, is the 360 shoot that we did directly from the iPad. I'll walk you through the way that we do this on the iPad. So we use the latest and greatest iPad because the CPU power of that device is unbelievably powerful, even more powerful than the computer of its same size. So remember I said that we take the output of the sphere, which is 4 streams at 7 to 8 megabits per second. So that's 32 megabits per second that we're sending wirelessly to a router. The iPad is Wi-Fi'd to the same router, pulling 28 megabits per second wirelessly into the iPad, and in a single frame, decoding all of those feeds, stitching them in real time, and then re-encoding them into a 4K 1440 resolution 360 RTMP feed. Easy, right? We have all the controls within the Sphere app to manually monitor, manually adjust the stream. We have the ability to take in spatial audio. So for the 360 event, we took in an audio feed from the board because, again, you're doing a VR event. Your cameras are typically in a place where the audio isn't. Because something else I'm going to show you is quite typically you want the sphere to be in the middle of the action because you want to give people that feeling that they're actually at the event in the front row, even on stage. So we have the iPad at Dancing with Stars, and we're feeding in audio from the board. And who has ever tried to do something wirelessly at an event where there's thousands of people? Not recommended. So here's the little cheat. We found, people have an iPad here, right? There is a Lightning to USB adapter available for about $30, and there is a USB to Ethernet adapter available for another $30. So what I did is I took the Lightning output of the iPad into a USB connector, and then the USB connector into a hard-lined Ethernet. So everything that I did at that show was over an Ethernet cable. I suggest you do the same. So we pressed live, and we can go to an unlimited number of CDNs because I'm going to demonstrate how we routed the stream. They were supporting YouTube. YouTube at the moment is supporting VR 360. People come to me all the time and say, can I stream, can I stream, can I stream? can I stream 360? The question is not so much can you stream, but is the CDN that you're using able to show that stream, right? More and more CDNs are supporting it. I know Wowzer is. I know these guys are. I know Streaming Media Hosting on the other side is. There's various different CDNs that can support it, and more and more are being added. I'm sure sooner or later Facebook will allow you to do the same thing as they allow everyone to do everything. So let me press play here, and we can actually watch some behind the scenes. This was during the rehearsals of the event, and as you can see, we are actually doing a 4K. We're pulling a 4K feed over Wi-Fi here, and what they had done was to put our rig on this. You see this this rail here. It looked like a really good idea to attach our rig to, and if you've ever seen it, it's about this high and it bolts into the table, and they thought that was a really good idea. Remember this when you're doing an event. It's not like 2D. So this was the rehearsals, and we had all the people's chairs here, and it looks like it's a perfect position, and everyone was dancing around. Here, let's pull to a little bit more fun part.
So graphics we go, then we start.
Yeah. Alright, so people are standing around, you're getting that kind of feeling that things are happening. This is kind of cool. You're able to look around at who's picking their nose and who's doing what. And one of the things that was really important that people also ask me is, can you put a fifth and sixth camera on the top and the bottom? And every streaming event I have ever done in 360, they've asked the same question. But then, sorry, 2 minutes left. But then, here's the question. What's upstairs? Nothing. What's down on the floor? Nothing. Why don't you add a graphic and add a logo and actually get someone to pay for some sponsorship? This is really easy to do with our gear, and something that whenever someone says add a 6th screen, no, get someone to pay for the stream. Anyhow, so the stream went off, went great, looked great here. But again, you see all these chairs here? When it packed up with people, and people stood up to clap, no one could bloody see anything. I mean, it looked great until they stood up. So, always be careful where you're going to place this rig, because, where it should have really been is hanging in a 360 above the dance floor, because you want to be able to move around with the person and watch them, because we can stream to goggles. So can you imagine if you put these goggles on and you could actually watch the dancer go around as you're dancing, right? So one other thing that you have to be very, very aware of, and this is, I'll finish on this note, but the people that sit around you need to know, if you're offering the stream, that this is a VR camera. I will do an impression of how this Karen Reynolds sat for the whole event on this chair. And I wasn't going to go and tell her because I don't know who she was. But people have to be aware that they're behind the camera, that they're all around the camera. You have to get sign-offs from all these people, and you have to make them really aware that they're part of the whole experience, which is very different from doing a 2D event. So the things that I would really stress, that if you are getting into this world, is learn where to put the camera, because even these experts didn't put it in the right place. It should have been in the middle. I'll tell you about an event that we did last week, or in Fashion Week in New York about a month ago. They were VRing a catwalk fashion show, which sounds fantastic, but you know, if this was the line that the lady was walking down, they put the camera over there and everyone stood in front, so you basically got to see the girl for about that amount of time. You really have to think differently, and remember, we can hang gear upside down and then with the app spin them all around. So you have a lot more flexibility when doing this kind of thing. Anyhow, are we finished already?
Yeah, 20 minutes goes fast, but we might have a few more minutes for people who are curious. But first, let's give a round of applause to John for teaching us about 360. And maybe a few quick questions if we have any. All right. We're a little over time, but it's the end of the day.
So I've been producing VR for about a year now, and I have clients all over the world. We've got one client based out of Israel. They've got it's all B2B news and information, so it's all business to business application. But I really want to move the camera. Do you have an application or a quick case study of where you've moved the VR camera, like put it on the end of the jib? Like, why aren't we moving these cameras more?
Absolutely.
I just feel like all the examples I'm seeing, I mean, my clients, they're not so picky. My clients are super, like, they love, like, we used, our first one was done on the 360 Fly camera, which is a piece of junk.
Right.
And they did backflips and, you know, they thought we were awesome, and we were not. But, you know, we're just getting into it, but I see this as the future.
Thank you. And this can all run off battery, right? Our rig can run off an Antelbau battery. It's wireless, so you can absolutely fly this thing. You can, you know, we absolutely, you know, that's the world that we play in.
So you have done moving cameras, jibs, and
yes,
all he was talking about?
we did a shoot, actually on Monday, we did an ad for a car commercial where they were, they no longer use a car. It's basically a vehicle with no skin that they then put the skin on afterwards here in LA, and they put our rig inside, and it was moving. So yeah.
Very cool. Well, thank you all for making the first day of Discovery Track a big success. We appreciate it. Come back tomorrow for more great talks, more prizes.